I was 16 at the time. My parents were away on a short vacation to celebrate their 20th anniversary. I acted sad when they left, but really I was super excited to be alone and have the whole house to myself. They left Friday morning after I went to school. When I got home, I made a quick snack with the food they left me, then went to the living room to play video games for the entire night. I had no school tomorrow and nobody was home to tell me to go to bed, so I wanted to stay up as late as possible and enjoy the time I had. I was playing online with my friends for a while, but my buddies weren't as lucky as me, so at around 10 p.m., all of my friends had to hop offline. Come 11 or maybe closer to 12 even, my neighbor's dog started barking. They had a huge dog, so it was really loud, even though their house was a good distance away from mine. I kept playing, but through the headphones, I could still hear the dog barking like crazy for what had been a whole 3 or 4 minutes. It was really late, so I was both concerned and annoyed. When I found a good time to pause my game, I got up really fast and looked out the side window over at their house. None of their lights were on, but their dog was still barking. I was pretty sure it was barking from inside the house too. Then I saw a man walking through their yard and onto the sidewalk. It was dark and hard to see, and I didn't see where he came from. Knowing the dog was probably barking at the guy by their house and seeing him walking away, I went back to playing my game. I played for 15 minutes or so before someone knocked on my door. It made me jump, but I was in the middle of a match, so I couldn't just get up. I kept playing during the knocks continue. When the match ended, I took my headphones off and heard the knocks again. With my headphones off though, I realized it was coming from the back door, not the front door. Then I remembered how late it was and got really confused, but also a bit agitated. What could they possibly want from me this bad to be continually knocking on the door at midnight? I stood up, but then I decided I didn't want them to see me and thought that if they realized nobody was home, then they'd leave and come back some other time. And if they stayed, then I'd know something was wrong. All the blinds were closed, so I didn't have to worry about that. I sat back down and continued playing. No more knocks came for a while after that. I played until almost 2 a.m. I was really tired, and my eyes were struggling from staring at the TV for so long. I took my headphones off and turned off the TV, then went upstairs to get in bed. Lay in bed for a few minutes maybe, not very long, when I heard something outside. A vehicle coming up our gravel driveway and stopping right in front of the garage. I stayed in bed, listening carefully. Someone got out of the car and closed their door, then walked around the house. I lost track of the footsteps once they made their way toward the backyard. A shiver ran through me. I got up and walked down the stairs slowly, still trying to not let anyone know I was home. But about halfway down the stairs, I heard someone by the back door. It sounded like they were messing with the lock. I ran back upstairs and called the police. I tried not to sound panicked, probably because I was a stupid 16-year-old and wanted to be cool. But they dispatched some officers to my house and told me to wait for 10 minutes until they arrived. I said okay and hung up the phone, then locked my bedroom door and waited. A minute later, there were a few noises coming from the back door. Then it opened. I heard someone walk in, then go into the living room. It sounded like they were taking things and putting them in a box. They moved quickly through each room downstairs, but after they went through the kitchen, they left, going back outside. I heard their car door open and close. I was relieved for just an instant, before I heard footsteps reapproaching the house, coming back inside and into the last room downstairs. I guess they dropped the box off and came back for more. At this point, I was regretting not showing myself, because the person downstairs really seemed to think nobody was home. He was making a lot of noise and was confident enough to come in for seconds. I was still sitting in my room, just listening to this horrible event taking place below me, when the footsteps started coming up the stairs. They went straight for my parents' bedroom, which was right next to mine. They were in there for a while, then they came out and went up to my door. The handle shook. Then the footsteps immediately left, back down the stairs and out of the house. The car pulled out and was gone in seconds. My heart was beating rapidly, and I was trying to control my breathing. I thought I was seconds away from having to fight for my life. When the police finally arrived, I told them everything. They called my parents too. After they checked around and finished getting info from me, the officers were confident that person wasn't coming back now that he knew I was inside the home. Aside from all that, my console was stolen, along with a bunch of other expensive things. So not only was I horrified all week, but I was also left with nothing to do until my parents got home. I'm just happy that whoever was behind that door ran away and didn't try to break inside, because if he saw me, I don't know what would have happened. I was at home making dinner on a regular night after work. It was around 7 p.m. or maybe even later, and I had gotten home from work only an hour before. I wasn't making anything fancy, just a small chicken breast and some frozen corn. I had just finished with the chicken and began draining the water from the corn when a light scraping sound came through the house. It was short and quick and not very loud, but the strangeness of the sound made me flinch a little. I continued doing what I was doing, thinking it was just some weird sound that the house was making that I had just never heard before. But then again, that same scraping sound vibrated through the walls. It was such an unusual sound, I had no idea what to think of it. I quickly finished plating my food, then went toward the front door to listen for it again, hoping to pinpoint where it was coming from. I waited for maybe 30 seconds, not hearing anything, then went back to the table to eat. Even still at this point, I wasn't thinking anything of it. I was only curious as to why the house was making that sound, but I wasn't worried in the slightest. I spent a few minutes eating, then went over to the couch to rest and watch some Netflix for a bit. But through the show, I would constantly hear that obnoxious scraping sound over and over. Eventually, it was just getting so aggravating that I turned off the TV and just waited, listening. When the sound came again, I was able to hear it more clearly coming from somewhere upstairs. I quickly walked up to the second floor, still just annoyed at the house for ruining my night, but also a bit more concerned that there may actually be something wrong with the house. At the top of the steps, I stayed in the hallway, waiting again for the sound. A whole minute went by of nothing, so I began searching the rooms to make sure everything was okay. It didn't seem like anything was unusual or broken, so now I was starting to really get confused and worried. I put some shoes on and went outside, and while it was dark, I figured I'd maybe be able to see a tree scraping against the house or possibly some other issue. I went to the side of the house where I knew there was a tree, but it wasn't windy at all, and the branches were nowhere near the side. I kind of just stood there, wondering how this was happening and why it suddenly started tonight. I was tired, and this was the last thing I wanted to be doing. I walked back around to the front of the house, and on my way to the front door, a glimmer of light came in the side of my vision. I turned and looked, as it seemingly came from the front of the house. I walked further down the driveway by the sidewalk and looked back, and that's when I saw a small light coming from one of the windows in a dark room of my home. After a couple seconds, I realized it was the attic window, and that the light was moving, almost like someone was shining a flashlight around. I was horrified. Someone was in my attic doing who knows what and for how long. I stayed out front, calling the police as I stared at the window, watching the light move around slowly, but as I was talking on the phone, the light got dimmer before shining directly at me. They held it there for a couple seconds, then shut it off, and even from outside I was able to hear a few loud thuds. I immediately ran over to my neighbor's yard, trying to explain to the operator what was going on while looking over at my house in terror. From where I was, it looked silent and calm, but that only made it more scary, knowing that something awful was likely going on inside. After a few minutes, though, nothing else was seen and the cops finally made it. They searched the house first, then brought me inside to talk. They found multiple shoe prints in the attic, and they suspected it was likely a group of teenagers messing around with me and likely not trying to cause any harm. There were no signs of anyone living there or anything, which was a relief. They found some carvings in the wooden beams, though, but they weren't anything specific, just lines basically. Again, the cops assured me that the kids were probably just messing with me and trying to get a reaction out of me. As for how they got in, they think they may have somehow gotten on the roof and climbed in through a window while I was at work that day. However, they exited through the attic doorway on the ceiling and got out through my back door. I know they said confidently that it was a harmless group of kids, but that doesn't make me feel any safer. Knowing that some random group of people broke into my house and was camping out there all day and at night while I was home is really unnerving. I mean, those cops didn't actually know what the group's intentions were, so who knows what they actually planned on doing. I work at a convenience store at the corner of a small shopping strip. It's basically a smaller, local version of a 7-Eleven. I worked morning shifts for a while, which started at 3 a.m. and ended at 1 p.m. I agreed to these shifts because they were always the slowest and required the least amount of work. All the parts of my job included tending to customers, filling the shelves, and taking out the trash, which pretty much meant I had nothing to do. It was the middle of winter at the time this happened, but I live in a warmer state, so it usually rains instead of snows. It was a light pour outside, but it was enough to keep most people away. On early mornings like these, I like to lean against the front of the building outside and smoke to pass the time. I wasn't supposed to, but there wasn't anyone to stop me. Along the shopping strip were maybe 8 or 9 other stores connected to ours. All of them were stores with normal hours, so none of them were ever open until around 6 or 7 in the morning. So when I saw a car pull into the parking lot while I was smoking outside, I of course assumed they were coming to the convenience store. I burned out my cigarette and tossed it in the trash, then headed back inside and around the corner. There really was nothing to do, so I was just waiting for the customer to come in and leave so I could get back to being bored alone. After a few minutes of nobody coming in though, I walked back around the corner and checked outside the door. The car was still there, parked in a parking space nearby, but the headlights were off, and as far as I could tell, nobody was inside. Again, it was lightly raining outside and all the other stores were still closed, so I was a bit confused as to where they went. I took one last look around, seeing nobody, then closed the door and went back inside. 30 more minutes of nothing went by, and I think I was just standing in the same spot behind the counter for the whole time, spacing out. I checked the time, seeing I'd only been at work for a little over an hour, and decided I should check the trash cans around the store and toss them in the dumpster out back. I walked around to each trash bin, putting the bag in the cart and replacing it with a new bag. As I was doing this, I heard a faint click sound come from outside. It sounded like something snapping or breaking, but between the rain hitting the roof and the sound being somewhat far away, it was impossible to tell what it was or where exactly it came from. In the moment it happened, though, I barely even thought about it. It just didn't seem like anything worth thinking about. Just another random sound these old buildings made. Once I filled the cart with all the trash bags, I rolled it into the back room and unlocked the back door that led to the dumpster. I sighed, seeing as the rain was pouring down harder now, of course, right when I actually needed to go outside. Regardless, I pushed the cart through the rain and over to the dumpster, which was directly across from the door. After tossing in all the trash, I turned back and started heading for the door, but I noticed something was out of place. The store directly connected to mine had its door wedged open. I'd never seen anyone there earlier than 6, so it made me think. I went back inside to get out of the rain and went out to the front door and looked at the other store's door. All the lights were off, and it looked locked up and empty like it always was at this time. I thought for a few more minutes before figuring I had nothing better to do and went back outside by the dumpster and walked up to the open door. Again, all the lights were off, but it seemed to lead into a small closet-type room, which then had another door, probably leading to the main storeroom. I stepped inside, standing in between the doorway so as to not make it seem like I was trying to sneak in or something. Standing inside now, I could hear someone moving around in the other room, walking, opening drawers. It sounded like they were making a mess, which then got me thinking even more. I called out, hoping to get a reassuring response from a neighboring store worker. The noises stopped. I waited a few seconds before I realized that this was not normal and something was definitely wrong. I stepped back outside and into the rain. As I quickly made my way back to my store, I recognized something was missing from the door I had just left. It took a second to figure it out, but then I saw that there was no handle. It was just an empty hole where the handle and lock usually are. Then I looked down at the wedge that was holding the door open, seeing now that it was actually the broken door handle. I ran back into my store, locking all the doors, and called 911, as well as my store manager. Once I knew they were on their way, I went up to the wall connecting our stores and put my ear against it, listening to the suspected robbery taking place. Whoever it was had to have known that I called the police, because they were moving quickly now, running all around, tossing or knocking things over. After 30 seconds to a minute of this, I saw lights flash outside and heard sirens approaching the back of the building. The footsteps quickly moved to the back of the store before a bunch of loud yelling came, which I assume was the officers. I checked out the back door after a minute, seeing a less hectic scene, and walked out to talk to the officers. I thanked them for coming so quickly and gave them a statement. The man who was arrested was found with a pillowcase full of nearly $6,000 worth of stolen items. He also had an empty firearm, along with a variety of tools used to break down doors and locks, and unknowing to me, he'd also broken into the store 2 spots down as well. It's unclear whether or not the man knew I was working at the time, but my store lights were on, so it isn't likely that he would have broken into my store. But several large scratches were found on the back of our door handle, which may have been from a previous attempt